Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sasha Star. It's a Ukrainian show on Pod TV. Also, we'll talk a little bit about Russia and China. And our guests today are Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Good to be here again.
Great to have you. And Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hello,
Great.
Jonathan.
Great
everyone.
to see you. Ivan, question number one. Do you have any videos that you would like to share?
Yeah, let's start with it.
Okay, thank you.
Человек, который хоть раз держал в руках какое бы то ни было оружие, знает, что гораздо лучше и безопаснее, если оно будет в разряженном виде храниться.
Приказываю министру обороны и начальнику генерального штаба перевести силы сдерживания российской армии в особый режим несения боевого дежурства.
Almost 30 years ago, Ukraine, the world's third largest nuclear power at the time, gave up its nuclear weapons. This happened after the Budapest Memorandum was signed. Bob's editorial team will tell you how this document influenced Russia's full-scale invasion and why the West is helping Ukraine so actively. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, skeptics said that the formation of new states with high nuclear potential will pose an increasing nuclear threat. One of these states was Ukraine. 2,000 strategic warheads, approximately 4,000 different types of tactical nuclear weapons, and about 1,000 soldiers and officers who serviced them. The West believed these nuclear weapons could be aimed at it specifically. To add to this, at that time, people associated Ukraine with the explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and a potential pile of Chernobyls was rightfully feared. To diminish the risks, the UK, the US, and later France offered Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons in favor of Russia. After all, it is better to have one big threat than several more. Ukraine agreed. In exchange for Ukraine's nuclear potential, the maintenance of which required high operating costs, the world's leading countries guaranteed the security of its sovereignty. It was precisely under these conditions that the so-called Budapest Memorandum was signed in Hungary in 1994, and it would have all been okay had it not contained a slow-ticking time bomb. 2014. Russia annexes Crimea and occupies parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, thus violating the memorandum on protecting Ukraine's sovereignty that Russia itself had signed. Other signatory countries agree upon the first sanctions packages against the aggressor country and try to resolve the issue through negotiations. But how come? After all, the USA, the UK, and France had guaranteed Ukraine's safety. The main problem of the Budapest Agreement was the translation of terminology. The Ukrainian version contained the term security guarantees, while other versions used the term assurances. And if, according to the Ukrainian interpretation, in case of aggression, a Western army would have to defend Ukraine, assurances only meant that certain actions would be taken to protect it, including sanctions. But starting February 24, 2022, in response to Russia's full-scale invasion, the former signatories of the Budapest Memorandum finally started to provide military aid to Ukraine, which is getting more significant each month. And this is all being done to restore the once promised territorial integrity of Ukraine as soon as possible. And it does not matter if there were guarantees or assurances. After all, actions speak louder than words.
Thank you. It's a great video, and I was always trying to dig into this so-called memorandum, the Budapest Memorandum, namely, to understand what's a legality and what is a common sense of follow-up on this memorandum and what other countries could have done better and so on, until one of the U.S. officials on our program, not on this one, but the other program on Pod TV, he said that it was just a memorandum. It was basically a voiced opinion, agreement. You can talk about it for hours, but it was not a treaty. It was not signed treaty which would say, in case of this, that would happen, or so on. So essentially, unfortunately, Ukraine has sold itself short. It should have been at least financially compensated for all the hardware that they delivered to Russia, which potentially could become its enemy, which actually happened. So if US was so interested to have all the nuclear weapons in one place instead of 4 places, so a party which would agree to deliver its nuclear weapons should have get, beside all these guarantees and assurances, it should have get some hard cash, say maybe $50 billion. That would do nicely. Or you can't pay $50 billion, then we have no deal. Okay, so then US and its allies would think, okay, now we have this situation, so what's the best way to deal with that? Well, maybe Russia would buy these weapons. Who knows? With assistance from the West. So that would have been a deal. Now Ukraine is taking a risk that very weapons could be turned against itself, but at least it was compensated for taking that risk. Jonathan, what's your take on this?
Well, my take on it was that I voiced it originally back in an article that I wrote in Strategic Review back in fall of 1994 on Ukraine, the aspiring nuclear power. And my conclusion was that without decisive intervention by the West, you would have to choose between increased nuclear proliferation or what I call the Charybdis of a Russian-Ukrainian war. And we thought we were buying peace. We thought we were buying peace by giving the nuclear weapons back to Russia. Instead, what we got in the long range was Charybdis, a Russian-Ukrainian war, and simply because I concluded then that Russia would never reconcile itself to the permanent loss of Ukraine. And I'd written that in editorials, and of course, because I'm not exactly a prominent analyst at the time, even though I published, they sort of, what does he know? But in any case, so in any case, we will have. It's interesting to note that Putin, in one of the speech that was just shown in Ivan's video, is that he said he had directed that Russia's nuclear deterrence forces. Now, you must remember how this sounds from the Russian perspective, because from the Russian language, the Russians, when they translate the word deterrence, when I first encountered it in Russian analyses of U.S. strategy, and they encountered the word deterrence, they would translate it 2 ways. One, the word sdерживание, which means to restrain or hold in check. Sdерживание, thank you. And or they would to restrain or hold in check, or they would translate it устрашение, which means intimidation. And while they went back and forth for a while, eventually one of their analysts concluded that although the Americans claim that deterrence means, and how's that exact pronunciation again, so I get it right from now on?
Сдерживание.
Сдерживание. They mean that it means to restrain or hold in check. Its actual intent is устрашение, which is intimidation. So they call them you can call them their nuclear intimidation forces from the Russian perspective, and makes perfect sense to them. But we hear that if we were to hear that or understand it more lightly, what they mean by it, we would not have such illusions about Russian intentions. So that's my take on it, and that is how they are using them as not to prevent conflict, they are using it as a cover, they're using intimidation forces as cover for carrying out aggression on the conventional level. They think, or they thought, that their nuclear forces gave them more freedom of action to use their own conventional forces to support their goals.
But mostly it was, obviously, in my opinion, an intimidation rather
Yeah,
than
very.
military. But
Yeah, if you look at it from the Russian perspective, it makes perfect sense to them.
absolutely. Ivan, I would like to ask you, okay, so we're talking about this Budapest Memorandum. So there are obvious interests of the West and primarily the United States to have all nuclear arms in one country instead of, say, 4 countries, for example, right? And it was obvious why Russia was interested to sign the Budapest Memorandum, because it acquired third largest arsenal for a song. What was Ukraine motivation at that time to agree to Budapest Memorandum? How would they explain it to their own people? Okay, we have third largest nuclear arsenal. Now we are going to deliver it to Russia, our potential enemy, which became a real enemy several years later. So what was the motivation? How it was explained to people in Ukraine?
Unfortunately, I can't remember how
Yeah,
actually it was explained,
obviously.
but
That's what I thought.
the different opinions I've heard about it. First of all, it was a mean of high operational expenses of keeping this nuclear arsenal, and it was like a rational explanation of why we are giving our nuclear weapons. Basically, we gave nuclear weapons, we gave the airplanes capable, heavy bombers capable of carrying out the nuclear weapons. We gave the missiles. Russia paid, they even didn't pay for it, but they cut some part of costs for gas Ukraine was consuming from Russia, and the emotional reason beside this was that the Ukrainian president at that time was Leonid Kuchma, which was mostly pro-Russian president. He was previous so-called Red Director. He was chairman of Pivden-Mash. It wasn't actually. It is the largest industry which is producing the rocket missiles, both for the ICBM missiles and also for launching the missiles to space, and it's participating in different space projects. And of course, Leonid Kuchma was mostly pro-Russian president. He was a communist, and he didn't consider Russia to be his enemy or enemy of Ukraine. And unfortunately, the part of Ukrainian politicians at that time who considered Russia to be our enemy in the future was too low to make some significant impact on this deal. And it was probably so low even to hire some good lawyers which could assist in better description of those Budapest Memorandum and making it actually a treaty, not a memorandum, and signing all different procedures of how the other countries will guarantee the security of Ukraine. But it's not on. Actually, it's not problem only of Ukraine. Yeah, and most of all, what will happen if one of the countries who guarantee security of Ukraine will actually broke this memorandum and will attack Ukraine. And but such situation is not even written in the laws, in the documents of United Nations. What will happen to a United Nation participant or even a Security Council member if it will broke the rules of the basic rules of the United Nations.
Not just a member, a ruling member for this month.
Yeah, and that's why no one can do nothing with the Russia breaking the international rules. But it may sound funny, but sometimes you're upset when lawyers are too making too many corrections in the agreements you are trying to sign, and especially lawyers you hire, and they advise you to put this and to put that into agreement and to contract. But after such cases, you understand that probably lawyers know more than you by trying to estimate all possible risks in those contracts and those agreements, because even countries which guarantee you security can break the agreement and attack you anytime.
It's still hard for me to accept what happened, because the Ukraine is delivering very valuable, in some cases unique hardware, which costs millions, if not billions of dollars to produce, to its potential enemy. Is there a possibility, nobody ever asked the questions, that maybe there were some elements of corruption, maybe Kuchma and his people, advisors or whoever they are, were paid? Because if they have not been paid something by Russians or US or so on, they're just very stupid people for what they've done. Now, if they were paid, it's okay. So they used their status to enrich themselves a little bit. It's not that I'm supporting that, but it's understandable. Now, if they were not paid and deliver all that, they are very, very stupid people. Ivan, what's your take on that?
Probably, and in Ukraine, there is such in Ukrainian law, there is such meaning like I'm trying to like official negligence.
Negligence.
Yeah, and
or in Ukrainian word, there is a word zrada. Maybe that was.
Yeah. And for instance, you probably heard about the destroying of the Mriya aircraft, the largest aircraft in the world during the first days of Russian full-scale invasion, and now the criminal investigation is being provided, is going against the former chairman of Antonov company. It's a government company which actually owned that Mriya aircraft, because he didn't take, knowing that the Russian invasion is imminent, and having all possible resources to evacuate the Mriya aircraft from the Kiev, from the Gostomel airport. He didn't take any actions to do it, and probably he'll get in jail for that. And I think that such crimes may not have any time of time limitations, and probably after the end of this war, we should also investigate the signing of Budapest Agreement, and what was motivation of Leonid Kuchma and other Ukrainian officials who were responsible for signing it, why they signed it on such conditions, what was beside that, and hopefully they will be punished as well, because recently Bill Clinton said that if he could predict that giving up the nuclear arsenal from Ukraine will cause such kind of war, he never pushed Ukraine to give up their nuclear arsenal. And I think that the people of Ukrainians will be very happy about such investigation to happen, and all guilty in signing that agreement to be punished, especially Leonid Kuchma. No, we don't have any peace, any warm feelings regarding Leonid Kuchma, and a lot of Ukrainians could remember how he pushed Yanukovych to become his
successor. And Putin
successor,
also was supporting Yanukovych in 2004 election. Yeah, and I think that's one reason why Putin is furious at Ukraine, because Yanukovych couldn't win this election in 2004. And but as I said, look, the Budapest Memorandum, I think it's almost like it never happened, that there is nothing really to discuss. Okay, it was signed, it was not signed, it doesn't really matter, so on. Unfortunately, what I heard recently, the former comptroller of the United States, he said that that's just a memorandum. That's all there is, a memorandum. It's nothing. So U.S. and others took advantage of Ukrainian naivety, that they couldn't even understand what they were signing. They couldn't see implications of what they were signing. And even if they did understand, then why would they sign in their right mind? It's just horrendous act, which has now, as we know, but it started in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea, when there will be such consequences, which nothing of that would be possible without that memorandum, right? Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, given this recent lesson of the Budapest Agreement, and once the Ukrainian-Russian war is successfully concluded in Ukraine's favor, I can pretty well predict what the Ukrainians are going to want once a peace is established. Obviously, top on their list, they're going to want to become full members of NATO. That's no question there. In addition, once they are full members of NATO, given the conduct of Russia during this war so far, Ukraine is going to want ballistic missile defenses on its territory. They are going to want an American presence on their territory.
Absolutely.
They're going to want American troops. It's more than symbolic. It is a guaranteed tripwire. Yeah, that you're at war with the United States, if Russia attacks Ukraine with American forces, no matter how symbolic or small, they'll be there, even if only to man the ballistic missile defense forces. And also, Ukraine will want to have, if they can get it, they'll want to have forward-based nuclear weapons stationed on their territory. So that as a member of NATO, and believe it or not, I would not bet against Finland wanting to have similar defenses and forces on their territory. They will want American forces on their territory, as well as ballistic missile defense forces, as well as nuclear forces, in order to not to attack Russia, but to contain it in a new version of the containment strategy. Russia will be unable to expand, and just like George Kennan had concluded in formulating the original containment strategy. So if Russia cannot expand, it will eventually collapse under the weight of its own internal contradictions and problems.
Brilliant. I totally agree with you, Jonathan. There was very interesting. I'm listening to Ukrainian and Russian sources a lot, and one thing what I've learned is that U.S. when they warned Putin not to use nuclear weapons, in fact, what they presented is a system of 5 missiles that are hitting exactly the same target, one after another, and at the end of the day, the last one penetrates any bunker or whatever structure it might be up to 2,000 meters. It's 2 kilometers deep. And the deepest Putin's bunker is only 300 meters deep. So
That's more than enough to ruin his day.
More than enough. Yeah, even if one of those missiles will miss for whatever reason, the four will do for sure. However, they mentioned that in China, their deepest bunker is exactly 2,000 meters deep. So maybe that's why the system was designed as exactly 2,000 meters and not so. And finally, what I'd like to mention is this idea of Putin to bring the nuclear weapons to Belarus. A lot of people now are saying that, first of all, Belarus already most likely have Russian tactical nuclear weapons. Number two, even if it doesn't, they have, and for example, so the concept is that Belarus now can threaten the Baltic republics and Poland, which is very close, and so on and on and on. It's nonsense because Russia has the Iskanders in Kaliningrad, which is exactly just as close to all those countries as Belarus. So what do they need Belarus when they have already Kaliningrad, which has all kind of weapons? Jonathan, what do you think? Is it nonsense?
The fact that they're forward basing these tactical nuclear weapons, it reminds me of what my former dissertation professor, Dr. Garay, once said in a discussion of finite nuclear deterrence. He was talking about using France as an example. And he said, well, the French, with their force de frappe, could threaten to destroy 10 Soviet cities. The Soviets, on the other hand, could threaten to turn France into a parking lot, at which point the French lose interest in being a nuclear power. Rather dry sense of humor. But the point is, at this point, yeah, if you forward base, I don't think the Belarusians have a vital interest in becoming a potential nuclear counterstrike target, which is what they would be. Russia is not, if they're supplying them with tactical nuclear weapons, they're using them as trying to use them as a forward nuclear base, but the Russians aren't really supplying any significant ballistic missile defense systems, which would indicate a more serious intent in ensuring that its ally, and I put that in quotes, survives its first use of any tactical nuclear weapons against NATO. And keep in mind, in accordance with the former Warsaw Pact nuclear plans, which called for the use of up to 300 nuclear weapons against NATO in the event of an actual war against NATO, in order for Putin to threaten this credibly, he has to be prepared for the mass use of nuclear weapons, not just a symbolic use of a few tactical nuclear weapons. I mean, in this case, it's all or nothing. He has to be able to deliver a knockout blow with his nuclear forces, which have never really been tested. And given the rate of radioactive decay in certain of these materials, there's a good chance that a lot of these so-called tactical nuclear weapons may not actually function. So there is that risk.
And before he would do that, I think he has to dig a new bunker 3 kilometers deep, and only then.
Really deep.
But I don't think that Russians have technology to build 3 kilometers bunker for him. And it's not just a bunker; it's it has to have an office. This recent revelations of the detector from
that office better have really good air conditioning.
Yeah. And he said that all his offices, they're all the same. Must be the same telephone so he would know how to dial and all the other stuff or so on. And Putin still doesn't use internet. Whenever he is going, he must have the television that shows all his propagandist channels and no internet whatsoever. Can you imagine that? That's incredible. That's what I learned. Just from this guy who just made it from his, he was a technician, radio and security officer in Putin's very close cycle. And he became very disappointed with this war. It started in February last year, and he decided to quit. And he was able to take his wife and son, I think, out, but his parents are still in Moscow, so they're already been interrogated and so on. So it's not a very pleasant situation for him. Now, the last level I mentioned that I read fantastic article. Unfortunately, I don't have option to share it with you, but maybe you've seen it. It deals with the upcoming attack of Ukraine, and they showed, I have a picture in front of me, of the incredible new technique that is coming from the West. So they're like huge, they look like a tank, but in front of it is like a bulldozer and equipment to deal with the mines, because Russians put probably a lot of mines. So it can defuse the mine.
Yeah, it's sort of that would probably be very similar to what the British used in World War II in the Normandy invasion, as well as where the British had these flail tanks, which would basically have a series of, on the front of the tank, which would whip up the ground in front of it and detonate any mines that were in front using clear mines.
Of course, it's much more advanced.
And the British had very useful devices like that, and eventually the U.S. adopted them as well during the Second World War. And this is probably an updated, much more high-tech version of that same concept that was first used in World War II. So if the Ukrainians have these flail tanks, so to speak, anti-mine flail tanks, that would be very useful, and it increases the unpredictability of exactly where the Ukrainians could strike in their counteroffensive.
Actually, whatever mines Russian already put in, it's not going to be a great defense for them, because these machines will really defuse
and
them.
you have to, in order for a minefield to be effective, it has to be covered. It has to be backed up by both personnel who can cover the minefield and attack forces trying to get through the minefield, as well as have that minefield covered by artillery fire. So the minefields are meant to delay, and they are meant to channel attacking forces, and unless, of course, the attacking forces have those anti-mine flail tanks. So.
Yeah, it's all in preparation right now. All this machinery, there's so much already came to Ukraine and keep coming to Ukraine. So it will be very, very difficult to delay much for this attack. I think the latest it will be probably mid-May.
The Ukrainians have to wait for just the right moment. They have to they have to time this very carefully, because you don't want to. If you launch the attack too soon, you don't have the full weight of your offensive behind the punch, and you run the risk of it being slowed down. If you wait too long, you run the risk of the Russians being allowed to recover sufficiently to mount a strong defense. So it's up to the Ukrainian military leadership and the political leadership to time this very carefully. They're just like a boxer that sees his opponent has exhausted himself, flailing away and not delivering a knockout punch. Now the Ukrainians, like a skilled boxer, has to wait for just the right moment to counterattack with his own set of punches designed to put his opponent on the canvas. So that is what Ukraine is waiting for. This is all timing now.
It would be great, Ivan, in some cities close to the Ukrainian border, maybe like Belgorod, maybe, I don't know, some Rostov, maybe Kursk, maybe some others. Are there any Ukrainian enclaves, Ukrainian people in those cities? Are you aware of it?
Definitely, there are a lot of Ukrainians who actually moved to those regions, and there are numerous Russians actually who support the Ukraine in this war and who provide Ukraine with the intelligence, who destroyed the logistic supplies of the Russian army, so-called Russian partisans, and definitely they will assist in Ukrainian counteroffense. Actually, I've heard that probably Ukraine will strike on one, two main directions, and they will use up to 3 or 4 some disgusting directions in order to make Russian army panic, and maybe some of those directions will be not on occupied Ukrainian territories, but on Russian territories, like Belgorod or Kursk regions, in order to make Russians take some backup forces from the front lines and move them there. And no one knows, as I've said before, where Ukraine will counterattack. But
and it's just as well that no one does really know, because the Russians are very carefully watching all of the discussions, trying to figure out, okay, which is the right one, which is their real intent. And in one sense, all of this discussion going on by all these various parties, it does in one sense work in our favor, in that it confuses the Russians. Okay, which expert really knows what's going on? Which expert is the most accurate? Because they're getting all this conflicting information. And there's a very good chance that in the midst of all this, the Russians will guess wrong, which is to our advantage.
I guess Ukrainians will not repeat Russian stupidity when they attack Bakhmut now for several months. And they took one building, and his name Prigozhin put some kind of flag, not even Russian flag. He put his own flag that they already taken main building in Bakhmut, but the next building right next to it, they still couldn't take it. So that's really funny, because if Ukrainians, for example, if let's see a place like Melitopol, they don't have to take Melitopol. They can go around it from the west and from the east, right to the Azov Sea, cut Melitopol. It will be still there, but nobody can supply that anymore. So they will be there for a few weeks here and there until they will eat everything. They will eat each other, and then whoever is alive, they will give up. That's really...
They will just they will surrender, because Russian troops, they don't have such a high level of motivation to protect their land like Ukrainian soldiers have, and because of Ukrainian soldiers have such a high level of motivation, they keep Bakhmut for 8 months already. Russians can't take it, and all previous Ukrainian counterattacks shown that when Russians see the possibility of being surrendered, they just throw away all their weapons, all their tanks, all their artillery, and just run away. And hopefully the upcoming Ukrainian counterattack will be so surprising and will be so fast, like it was during the liberation of Kharkiv region, that Russian troops will just not will not have any time to run away, and they will be surrendered, and the only way for them will be to surrender. Hope for this very much.
Yeah, well, there is one announcer, a very pretty girl on one of the Ukrainian channels, She talks in Russian. She's talking to Russian soldiers. So she says effectively, our dear Russian boys, look, you have three choices now before you. Okay. The choice number one, to be killed. So you wanted to come to Ukraine, you will stay in Ukraine forever. Okay. The option number two, you can turn yourself and give up to Ukrainian army. You will be well treated. No, nothing horrible will terrible will happen to you, and will take care of you. Option number three, just leave. Just leave Ukraine, go back to Russia, and do whatever you want in Russia. You can fight in Russia against each other. You can do anything what you want in Russia. Forget about Ukraine, just leave it. These are your three options. Most of you will stay here in Ukraine forever. Those few lucky of you, you can choose turn yourself in or go and leave and never come back. Okay, with that, I would like to thank you so much for participating in today's program. And I will see you next week, Tuesday. Bye-bye, everybody. Slava
Bye.
Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Thank you.